Welcome to Kent Hance, the best storyteller in Texas. We'd love to hear from you. Send email to info@hancepodcast.com. Find us online at hancepodcast.com and on Instagram at Best Storyteller Podcast. Chancellor Hance, get us started with your saying of the day.
Saying of the day comes from Albert Einstein. He said that when there's problems, weak people seek revenge, and strong people will forgive, and highly intelligent people will ignore. And that's great advice. I mean, if there's a problem or something, just, don't try to get even. I mean, that wastes all of your time. Or forgiving is better than trying to get even. But the best is when there's something like that, just ignore it and stay on your game plan. Today, I want to talk about several things. One's the movie Reagan, and it comes out the 30th. It comes out this Saturday. Now, they've advanced it to some different groups, and a lieutenant governor had a copy, showed at the Bullock Museum, and I was invited to say a few words at the Williamson County Republican event that was shown at one of the theaters in Georgetown, and it's an excellent movie. I was really impressed, and I'm not big on movies. I think it's 2 or 3 hours a waste of time. But this was about 2 hours and 15 minutes, and it was really good. It's based on a book called The Crusader, Ronald Reagan, The Fall of Communism. And it was written by a guy named Paul Kengor. And Paul Kengor is a political science professor at Grove City College in western Pennsylvania. It's a college of about 2,500. It's a conservative liberal arts school, much like Hillsdale College in Michigan. He is also director of the Institute of Faith and Freedom, and it's really a good movie, and it came from a book that he spent a lot of time arranging and interviewing a lot of people. It starts as his birth and goes through his high school, junior high, elementary. Talks about his dad fighting alcoholism and having a lot of problems. Talks about his mother inspiring him, reading to him, and being someone that helped him a lot. And all through the book, it has individuals brings up, and that it was fun to me because I was there at the time, and there's some of the people they had. But this movie is about foreign affairs, and it's really how Reagan broke up the Soviet Union. And there was very little domestic policy. And that may be a different day, a different movie. But they had Ed Meese. They had Ed Meese in the movie. And Ed Meese was a good friend of mine. I got him to come speak at Texas Tech after he was out of public service. And Meese was... The press always tried to portray him as dumb. Well, he was valedictorian in his high school, and he went to Yale, and then he went to Cal Berkeley to law school. A lot of people say, well, every student's going to get brainwashed by the faculty or something like that. Ed Meese didn't get brainwashed to anyone. He was a conservative guy and really was very effective as chief of staff in California for Governor Reagan. And they got to be real close, and he gave him a lot of advice, and he was one of the ones he could really depend on. And most people thought that it was going to be a situation that Ed Meese would be chief of staff. And Reagan made that decision, and he went with James A. Baker, Jim Baker, from Houston. And there was a wise choice. And he got Baker and Meese and Mike Deaver. Mike Deaver was a guy that did PR. He was from San Jose State, and he worked in the governor's campaign when Governor Reagan got elected governor of California. And one time in the 76 presidential campaign, they were on a plane, and Reagan got to eating some peanuts and choked on them. And they were trying to figure out what to do, and there's a big, emergency, and Mike Deaver went up there and gave him the Heimlich and, solved it. But there was nobody else that had an idea of what to do. He could have died. And Mike Deaver became really like a son to President Reagan and Nancy. He was very, very close. If you had a major problem, Deaver's the guy you wanted to go see, because he was always briefing the president on something. In Congress, we call him the trifecta, and that was Ed Meese, and he was head of the cabinet for the president, presided over the cabinet when the president couldn't be there. Deaver and Jim Baker. And the president told him he wanted them to work together and run the situation on any issue at the White House. Whoever was handling that issue reported to those three. And they met every day. And the problem you get at the White House, and you get it, members of Congress, the staff will get to fighting with each other on who's closest and try to, show they have more power. And that didn't happen with these three. And Baker had been George Bush's campaign manager. And one of Reagan's aides said, "You're going to make Baker chief of staff," and he's on the other side. He said, "Well, the guy disagreed with us 80% of the time, be one thing, but he agreed with us 80% of the time. And I trust him, and I want to have him, and I think it'll help unite the party." And it did. And Baker had great judgment. And I was talking to former Senator Phil Gramm the other day, and he was talking about how good Baker was. And I knew him well. And one day after one of my classes, a student came up and said, "You're friends with my granddad." And I said, "Who's your granddad?" And he said, "Jim Baker." And I said, "James A. Baker?" And he said, "Yeah, it's Pawpaw," or whatever he called him. And so I called him, and he said, "Oh, yeah, he calls us every Monday night and gives us an update on what you've taught on that day." And he said, "Most of the stories he tells, I've already heard. I heard them first time." And I told him I was recycling. He was absolutely the best, and did a good job for Bush as Secretary of State. But thought about running for president, just didn't want to go through all that.
Those three seem very Reagan-esque in that they really believed that you could accomplish a lot if you didn't care who got the credit.
Yeah, and they didn't care who got the credit. I mean, they wanted the president to get the credit, right, and that's what they worked for, and they were successful at it. Meese was very intelligent. Meese could take a subject and get it in a position that he could explain to the president, what the issue was about, and Reagan could put it in common terms where the average citizen fully understood it. Reagan had the ability to communicate. He was called the great communicator, and he was, and did a good job. Dr. Kingor, that wrote the book, he's also does work and writes papers for the Heritage Foundation and the Hoover Institute. So he's involved. He's a conservative guy. He and his wife have 8 children. That 2 of them are adopted. But he's a very good researcher and writer. It's not a mean-spirited book about politics. It doesn't go out and bash Democrats. They show a couple of highlights. The one where Mondale's talking about, Reagan's probably too old, and Reagan said he wasn't going to bring up the lack of maturity of Mondale in being so young, and he wasn't going to use that as a issue in the campaign. Main thing about the movie, it's told in the terms of a guy that's named Victor Ivanov, and he talks about the KGB, and they had a background on Reagan, and he kept telling them, "I tell you, this is the guy that you got to fear. You know, he is a big problem." And they were kind of believing everything they saw in the American press, and they thought he was just a dumb actor or something, which he broke their country up and dissolved the Soviet Union without firing a shot. And it also shows speechwriters that they had the provision in there, Mr. Gorbachev, take this wall down. And that they didn't, Schultz didn't want him to say it, Secretary Schultz. And that Deaver told him, if you feel comfortable saying it, and you believe that, say it. And he said it. And that Gorbachev didn't do anything about it. And the people from East Germany and West Germany went down and tore the wall down. And I have a gift that a guy bought part of the wall and had it broken up and had it encapsulated in glass that was part of the wall that was torn down that day. The storytelling of Reagan, what he was doing, what it was important to him, is just so accurate. And that was at a time, you know, Democrats were working with the Republicans. There was starting to be a little controversy later on, but they were more in tune with each other and trying to make sure that they confronted and broke up the Soviet Union. And that's what Ronald Reagan did. He had the trifecta, as we used to call him. He also had Judge Clark, and I didn't know him very well. He had been a Supreme Court judge in California, very intelligent guy, and they made him Deputy Secretary of State. And he did well his first couple of years, but when Schultz came in, he lost a lot of his power. And Schultz, they were talking, the Russian that was the KGB, they called Schultz the Tiger Man. And they said, you know, a question came up, why is he the Tiger Man? They said he's got a tattoo of a tiger on one of his butt cheeks. And they said at one of the meetings that one of the KGB guys had briefed one of the administrators from Russia, and he said to Schultz, you know, nice to meet you, Tiger Man. He said, well, why'd you call me Tiger Man? And he said, oh, you know, and just kept going. And Schultz was like, they're pretty good. They got pretty good undercover. And I think that if you go just a, you know, few movies every once in a while, you'll like this. And it was excellent. It also went out of their way to point out things that he had to deal with as a young boy in his high school and college. I think, you know, Reagan, he called baseball games over the radio, and he did it by getting the teletype, you know, and strike one, he'd read that, strike one. Low and inside, ball two, you know, and one time his teletype stopped on him. And so they had to go off the air and play some music, so we've got something wrong with our feed to the Cubs, you know, game. And he had a gift of gab. He was able to do that he'd tell me, there's a it's foul ball by just inches. Could have been a home run. And people be sitting there listening and thinking they were on top of everything.
Was there any mention of jelly beans in the movie?
There was. I talked before the movie. I told them the jelly bean story, and then they came out during the movie, and he was trying to give some jelly beans to somebody, and everybody in the crowd laughed. You know, they looked at me, and Nancy took him some jelly beans when he was in the hospital after he was shot. And they go through that and how serious that was. But, you know, most of us, I was in a hearing in the Ways and Means Committee, and someone came in and said, President Reagan's been shot. And then somebody said, no, they shot at him, but they didn't hit him. And then somebody else came in and said they hit him. And the chairman of the committee from Florida said, why don't we just, take a recess? And we didn't go back until the next day. But it was a scary time, and it was unusual in that they didn't think there was a direct hit or anything.
Yeah, it's crazy. News didn't travel quite as fast back then.
Just shows you how much things have changed. You take 100 years ago, well, there'd be a newspaper would come out and tell you what happened. And 200 years ago, newspaper, it'd take it a week to get out. There's political fights going on all over the country, and it's in city halls, and it's on ordinances. And there are ordinances about having animals inside city limits. And the big one that is controversial is about chickens. And people pass an ordinance where you can have chicken, but then they have to pass an ordinance. It can only be a chicken. It can't be the rooster. And what happens, people, that rooster, sometime in the summer, he may get up about 4:30, start crowing and waking everybody up. And so the trend has been that they'll go back and change the ordinance if someone brings a rooster in, and it's not. You might be encouraging somebody to kill your rooster if you brought it into town. But a friend of mine in Dallas, he had some people had some chickens next to him, and they always had fresh eggs, and they were happy about that. But when the people brought in the rooster, they had a different opinion. We don't want him out there. He can crow at some other time. I was reading a sports page the other day, and Joe Namath, in his career, had a losing record. And he won 62 games and lost 63. But he's still a famous player because when they won the Super Bowl, when no one gave the Jets a chance to win the Super Bowl, and he did. But they use him on ads today. Hearing aids. He's big on hearing aids, and my favorite story on hearing aids is when Jake Pickle, congressman from Austin, who's a great guy, got new hearing aids, and in the committee meeting that morning before it started, when I went by him, I said, Jake, how do you like your hearing aids, new hearing aids? And he said $730. And I thought, you might want to get those checked out before you make that last payment.
Chancellor, who was it back in the day that introduced you to Joe Namath?
Oh, it's Jack Copeland. He asked me, he said, would you like to go see Joe Willie? And I was, I said, Joe Willie? He said, yeah, Joe Willie Namath. I said, sure. And I was in Congress at the time, and we went by this. He had the driver. That was when Jack was rich. He is always rich or broke, and a great guy, funny guy. And so we're in Manhattan, and we go to this office, and we ride the elevator up, and we go in this office, and it didn't have Namath's name on it or anything like that. And a young lady was sitting out there, a receptionist, and she said, "Can I help you?" And Jack said, "Yeah, well, I'm Jack Copeland. I'm here to see Joe Willie." And she said, "Well, just a second." She said, "Just a second." And that time you hear Namath's voice said, "Jack Copeland, come on in. You don't even have to knock." You go in there, and they get telling stories. See, Jack would always drop these names, and you think, he doesn't know Joe Willie Namath, and he did. And if you'd said, he doesn't know the Pope, well, you might go see the Pope, and he might walk out on the balcony and have Jack Copeland with him. Somebody might say, "Who's that with Jack Copeland?" But he was hilarious. Saying of the day is one you need to remember. It's about problems, and says weak people, when they've had a problem with somebody, they seek revenge. And if you look at strong people, they'll ask for forgiveness, or they'll work it out. And if you look for highly intelligent people, they're going to ignore it. Just going about it. You know, I had somebody ask me one time if I was going to try to get even with people that crossed me in politics. There's not enough hours. You'd spend all your time trying to get even. It wouldn't matter. Have a good day.